So without further ado, I turn it over to my good friend, Olga. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Hello, with an hour more or less. Here we are. Let me get to my screen sharing. There we go. PowerPoint. And let me see. Why can't I get to, just a second. Diapositive, it won't get away from me. Okay, there we go. And the presentation mode, like that. Are we good?
Yes.
A church. Yes. Good. Just move the commands. Go back to the first one. Is everyone there? Do we have a few more people?
They're coming in, and I'm letting them in, and you just go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right. So, as Carolyn mentioned, yes, there are about 900 churches in Rome, the capital of the Christianity. And it also depends on who's counting and how it's counted, because you may count the churches that have been deconsecrated in the meantime, or functioning, non-functioning, some that are just the chapels. But anyway, shall we say a lot? So whoever counts will arrive to a huge number of churches. But I'd like to start with a mother of all the churches, which is the Archbasilica of St. John in Lateran. Lateran was a family who had a land in this neighborhood, and Emperor Constantine started actually entered in possession of that land when he married his second wife, Fausta. And he built the first church here in Rome, and it's considered the oldest, the mother, as I mentioned, the mother of all the churches. So this is St. John in Lateran. Obviously, what you will see has nothing to do with the 4th century church. It has been built, rebuilt, restored, reconstructed. There have been periods when the popes were in Avignon, for example, in the 1300s. There were a couple of fires, earthquakes, so everything that happens throughout the centuries. The orange building next to the Cathedral of Rome, this is the Cathedral of Rome, was the papal residential palace, Palazzo Laterano. And today it's a museum, houses the offices. This is basically the extraterritorial property of the Vatican. Across the street to the right, you see there are those 2 cypress trees. There is a shrine called Scala Sancta, or Holy Stairs, that I'm going to mention later as well. But let's start with St. John in Lateran, Christo Salvatore. At first, the church was dedicated just to Jesus Christ, and then later John the Baptist and John the Evangelist. So it's marked by this enormous obelisk. This is behind the basilica, and it is the largest standing obelisk in the world. We're talking about an ancient Egyptian one, and it dates back to the 15th century BC. Now, in the 1500s, the Pope, Sixtus V, reorganized Rome urbanistically quite a lot, and it was his brilliant idea to re-erect some of these obelisks that were found in that period in Rome, because whenever you build something in Rome, you run into something from the past. So this obelisk was in Circus Maximus, the stadium for chariot races, and the Pope positioned altogether 5, actually 4. One was already in place. We're going to see it, the obelisk of St. Peter's Basilica. And he used them practically as a sort of a GPS for the pilgrims. So the biggest, the oldest in Rome, there are 13 altogether, and 8 or 9, depends who's counting and which book you're reading, are ancient Egyptian, and some were made by ancient Romans. Anyway, they are really, really old. So that's the oldest one. So we are behind the Basilica right now. The Logia of the Benedictions, of the Blessings, was also built by the same Pope, Sixtus V. So you can see the hieroglyphics. Usually the obelisks that have hieroglyphics are ancient Egyptian, as, let's say, a rule, not always. And at the bottom, you see it was Sixtus V who erected this obelisk. Of course, he Christianized it. You could see the cross at the top. And as we enter the portico of the St. John in Lateran, there is a statue of Constantine, the first Christian emperor, who also built not just St. John in Lateran, also St. Peter's Basilica and a few other churches also in Jerusalem, the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. Some churches have been attributed to Constantine, but without much certainty. But however, let's say that this is the first one and really glorious. It's a bit off the beaten path. It's not in what we would consider the strictest downtown of Rome, around the Pantheon or so. As you could see, there's a lot of land around it, but it's still within the wall from the 3rd century, which is sort of a border within which we consider it the historical part of Rome. And the basilica today consists of many layers of history. The ceiling is 1500s. We'll go to the main altar, which has 14th century canopy. The statues of the apostles that you see in the niches on the left and on the right are from the 1700s. So St. John in Lateran has been through many different phases. And what we see here, this is the apse behind the main altar. And at the bottom on the floor, you can see the throne. This is the bishop's throne, because Pope is the Bishop of Rome. And the throne of the bishop is called cathedra. So that's what makes, in the Catholic Church, the church a cathedral. So we cannot say we saw many cathedrals in Rome, because there's only one, and it's St. John in Lateran. And above, we see these striking mosaics. Originally, there were the mosaics here from the 5th century, and probably only the face of Jesus at the top dates back to that period. Already in the 13th century, they were redone. And then this is also the restoration of the 13th century. So that's how it goes with these old monuments. They have to be restored, repaired constantly. And this is the ciborium, or a canopy, above the main altar. And it's from the 14th century. And according to the tradition, it contains 2 relics. Actually, it does contain 2 relics, but according to the tradition, those relics contain the skulls of St. Peter and St. Paul, who are jointly the patron saints of Rome. And there's also a magnificent cloister from the 13th century. So there's plenty to see at St. John in Lateran. Its medieval soul was wrapped up in this Baroque, beautiful dress, I would call it, by Borromini, the extraordinary architect of the 1600s, the competitor of Bernini. And you can see a medieval tomb and this wonderful fluffy frame, which was designed by Borromini. He gave this last, most important touch to the Basilica, and it was done under the Pope Innocent X. Even if we didn't know it was him, when we see the dove with the olive branch, that is the symbol of the Pope Innocent X. Many popes were involved. There is a symbol of the column. That was the Pope from the family Colonna, or the column, Martin V. So we cannot go into all the popes who were involved, but just to give credit, some of them. And this is one of the apostles. This is Saint Bartholomew, who was flayed. He was skinned alive, and he's holding his skin. If you've seen our presentation on the Sistine Chapel, there is the self-portrait of Michelangelo on the figure of Saint Bartholomew in the Sistine Chapel, also holding his own skin. And before we go to St. Peter's Basilica, there's St. Peter holding the key. I'd like to show you what I promised earlier, which was the Holy Stairs shrine. According to the tradition, the stairs, which are in wooden casing, they're marble stairs inside, were brought to Rome by Saint Helen, mother of Emperor Constantine. And pilgrims climbed them on their knees. It's like a penance or prayer. And at the top, there is Sancta Sanctorum, or the holiest of the holy places, which was the private chapel of the popes before the Sistine Chapel, because popes used to live in the Lateran palace by the cathedral. They moved to St. Peter's after that area, after they returned from Avignon, from France, in the late 1300s. And that is a medieval, absolutely striking little chapel where I'd love to go, because not just of the frescoes, but one of the most beautiful mosaics. This is a 13th century Jesus on the ceiling of the chapel that contains also other works of art, and used to contain, and still does, some of the most important relics of the Christianity. Now, as promised, off we go to St. Peter's, which is not in Rome. I did talk about the churches of Rome. St. Peter's is in the Vatican city-state. But I included it, however, because St. Peter is St. Peter, and just wanted to show you this beautiful square designed by Bernini in the late 1600s. And inside, there's this enormous church known as the biggest church in the world, although in Ivory Coast, there seems to be a slightly bigger one. But this thing, what's the biggest, tallest, largest, is always problematic, because it always depends how you're counting, the volume, the size, the height. Anyway, big, big it is. And inside, you can see basically the final touch that was given to it by Bernini. For 50 years in the 1600s, Bernini was the architect of St. Peter's. There was an ancient Roman stadium here in this area. This is where Peter died, and during the persecutions of Emperor Nero, and he was buried in the cemetery right outside of the stadium. And the first basilica was built on top of his tomb. And there we go. This is the second one, actually, that replaced the medieval Basilica of St. Peter. It took 120 years to build it. So we start with Bramante, and later Michelangelo, then Bernini, of course, many, many other extraordinary architects. The most famous, still, there's always a competition between the artists, even posthumously. So here is the Pieta. The Pieta in art stands for Mary with dead Jesus. So Michelangelo himself there is a Pieta there are two actually, in Florence. There is his other Pieta in Milan that he never finished. This is the most famous of all the Pietas in the history of art. Mary, beautifully represented, so very young. Now you can say that she's eternally young because she's free of sin. Or maybe Michelangelo, what he had in mind could have been that Mary was actually in this particular scene looking at her baby and having a vision, contemplating what is going to happen. And she's practically offering her son, who's weightless. You can see his legs are levitating. And this is the only work of art that Michelangelo ever signed. If you look at the chest, there is an inscription on the ribbon with his name. Now, walking around St. Peter's, you can sometimes run into these fancy young gentlemen. They are the Swiss Guards. They were brought to Rome by Julius II, the Pope who started rebuilding the Basilica in 1506. And there are about 100 of them, and they stay in Rome for 2 years, and then they go back to Switzerland unless they become officers. And it's a question of honor. And frequently the father, the grandfather in the family, they were the Swiss Guards of the Pope. And they're wearing these traditional uniforms as they wear historical uniforms from the times of the Medici popes. There were popes from the Medici family. Now, the baldacchino, the canopy, was designed by Bernini. It's made of bronze, and it is right above the papal altar, so only the Pope can say the Mass from this altar. There is the altar that's used every day. Also in the morning, there are many chapels in St. Peter's, but this is the main altar, the altar of the Pope. And the tomb of Peter is up some 30 feet below, and you can only visit those excavations making a reservation way ahead, and they let limited number of people to go to the excavations where the actual ancient Roman cemetery was situated. Above the baldacchino, you see there is the Holy Spirit in the center, and the baldacchino is basically made of cloth, of fabric, but Bernini made it in bronze to seem as if it were fabric. He was absolutely the genius of, especially of the theatrical effects. And above the canopy, there's the famous dome that was started by Michelangelo. He died before it was completed, and it was done later, 20 years after he died, by two architects, Della Porta and Fontana. And it is still the tallest in the world, they say. Again, this thing, tallest, shortest, biggest. And it's possible to climb the dome, and it's absolutely worth it. It's just that the elevator takes you only to a half, and then you still have to climb little stairs inside the dome, because the dome is like a double shell for stability. And you arrive to the top, and there's Rome at the palm of your head, always better in the afternoon with the sun behind you. You see how Bernini designed St. Peter's Square in the form of two gigantic arms as the pilgrims are coming to the Basilica that's God's embrace. And in the middle, there is one of those obelisks I mentioned. This one was brought to Rome by Caligula, the famous nutcase, and it was erected in the middle of the stadium, but then it was slightly off with respect to what we needed for the Basilica, so it was repositioned by a very brave Pope after Michelangelo died. Michelangelo actually thought it was impossible to move the obelisk, but they did, and there it is. That is one of the 5 obelisks that mark the most important churches of Rome. It's like a 5-pointed star of Mary. That was the urban planning of the Pope Sixtus V in the 1500s. Now there are basilica churches. Basilica is a confusing title because there's ancient Roman basilica, comes from basileo, which means a king. And those were the public buildings for gatherings, political, usually the courts, the tribunals. And in the Christianity, the shape, the rectangular shape with aisles and columns was taken over, and the name stuck. But eventually, Basilica in the Catholic Church becomes a title. And there are 900 churches in Rome, but 66 have the title Basilica. Only 4, usually they're most important churches for the pilgrims because they contain some important relics or tombs of the saints. And there are only 4 papal basilicas. They're called also sometimes basilicas major. So St. Peter, St. John in Lateran, and then we'll go also to St. Mary Major, Santa Maria Maggiore, and St. Paul outside the walls. So 4 papal basilicas, and the others are known as minor. There are more than 1,800 minor basilicas in the world. And they all, the papal basilicas, so 4 of them, have the holy doors. The holy doors are walled normally, but they're open during the so-called Jubilee years. And this door was completed under the Pope. You see at the top, it says Paul V, Pontifex Maximus, the title of the Pope, the supreme priest. But below, we have 2 more popes mentioned, John Paul II and Francis, the current Pope. John Paul, because he brought that door, physically, that door is from 1950, but he opened that door for the 2000, for the biggest Jubilee ever in the history of the Catholic Church, celebrating the anniversary of the birth of Christ. And Francis, you see to the right, it says Francis. He opened it also for the extraordinary jubilee that he indicted when he became a pope in 2015. So those doors are open for the pilgrims to go through. It's like a final purification. After you've been to 7 pilgrimage churches, you go through a holy door. Not like we'll see with Caroline, if we can do also the actual pilgrimage in Rome to follow the route. I believe it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could go to St. Peter's for art. For example, these these amazing altarpieces that were painted originally on wooden panels, but the humidity started damaging them. So they have been replaced. They were replaced in the 1700s, mainly with micro mosaics. They're really stunning. And the originals were distributed between some churches and the museums. This is a tomb of John Paul II and the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian by an artist called Domenichino. There's the most important of those is Raphael's Transfiguration. Below is a cute little dead pope. He died 300 years ago, Innocent XI. Some of the Pope's bodies are visible. They're given these silver masks, but Pope has to be dead for quite a long time. And it's really no longer a thing to do so much. You first have to become a saint and then we'll see. But it used to be a tradition. Now, we'll go now to Santa Maria Maggiore, Saint Mary Major, called like that. There are so many, there are hundreds of churches dedicated to Virgin Mary in Rome. But in 431, there was the so-called Council of Ephesus, and it was decided that Jesus was of the same nature as God. And that made Mary not the mother of Christ as a title, but the mother of God. So according to the tradition, this is the first church dedicated to Mary as Theotokos, the mother of God. And also it was rebuilt many times, but inside you will see it is the only basilica that maintains its original shape, Paleo-Christian or early Christian. And this is an ancient Roman column with the statue of Mary at the top, another example of the continuation of the glory of Rome through Christianity. But behind, we'll jump a little bit right behind the basilica, this is this obelisk that marks it on the pilgrim's route. And if we would now turn our back to the church, we would see this street going straight towards another obelisk, which is at the top of the Spanish Steps, marking the Church of the Holy Trinity. So this is the GPS for the pilgrims. They could see that as they entered Rome from the northern gate, Piazza del Popolo. So now we are inside St. Mary Major, Santa Maria Maggiore. You can see these extraordinary columns and the coffered ceiling from the 1400s, gilded with the first gold that came to Rome from Americas as a gift of Isabel, the Catholic Queen, and Ferdinand, the Spanish royalty. And the columns, there are 42 of them. They're ancient Roman, and they most likely come from a temple to Juno or Hera that was on the Esquiline Hill originally. In between the columns, you can see up below the ceiling, there are those square blue patches. Those are extraordinary mosaics from the 5th century. So that's really rare. Not much remains from that time. And these are the stories from the Old Testament, life of Moses, Abraham, Joshua, and so on. So really, really extraordinary mosaics. And if you go down to the confession, so below the main altar, here's the Pope Pius IX praying. So that's 1800s. And his inauguration in front of one of the most important relics, which is the so-called Holy Crib, or the manger of Christ, which is wrapped up sort of in this reliquary made in the 1800s, beautiful crystal and silver. And we are right below this canopy from the 1700s. You see how many layers we have there. Then there's this so-called triumphal arch with mosaics from the 5th century. Then in the apse, the mosaics from the 13th century, absolutely stunning. The coronation of the Virgin, because the basilica is dedicated to Mary. Now, on the side, there are 2 chapels that were added. One is known as the Sistine Chapel. Now that sounds confusing. Don't we have a Sistine Chapel in the Vatican? Yes, we do. But that one in the Vatican was decorated, built by the Pope Sixtus IV. So Sisto, Sistina. And there is a chapel here in the Santa Maria Maggiore where there was the tomb, and it was built, decorated by the Pope Sixtus V. So it's again Sixtus, and it's a Sistina. But this one is Borghese. I'd like to show you everything, but I have to pick up the most important. So Borghese, those of you who were with us for the tour of the Gallery Borghese have heard the name, the Pope Paul V, Borghese. His tomb is here. And this is this amazing Baroque style. Everything was baroqued up in Rome. But at the main altar, there is the icon of Mary that is very much popular among the pilgrims. And at the top, there's this little work of art where you see the Pope sort of cleaning the snow. Well, there's a legend that in the 4th century, there was this Pope to whom a patrician, John, said, I had a dream, you know, Mary said that we have to build a church for her, and there will be a sign, there will be a miracle. And it was the 5th of August, and it snowed on Esquilin Hill. So this is the Pope tracing the perimeter of the future Basilica St. Mary Major. And on the 5th of August, the snow in the form of white rose petals falls from this gilded ceiling. That's something to attend, something to look forward. Now, let's continue with the Papal Basilicas. This is St. Paul outside the walls, because it is outside of the historical city walls. And it looks very 1920s, late 1800s, because it is. It was originally built by Constantine, again, through many modifications. It was the biggest church in Rome until St. Peter's was finished in the 1600s. And there happened a fire in 1823. A careless worker caused the fire of the roof, and boom. So it was restored. A few things survive, as you will see. These columns were granite brought from Baveno, from north, near Lago Maggiore. And the mosaics were restored the way they were. Originally, they went back to the 1200s, Cavallini. We'll see some stuff by Cavallini later. And the church was rebuilt more or less as it was, with the columns that were brought again from northern Italy, a very similar coffered ceiling as in Santa Maria Maggiore and St. Mary Major. And you can see along the sides, there are those round medallions. Those are the portraits of the popes that start with Peter, the first pope. And in the apse at the far end, there are some remains from the Middle Ages. But before we get to the main altar, I'd like to show you one of the doors. It's from the 11th century. It's a Byzantine door, and it's on the inside of the Holy Door that St. Paul also has. And there are the stories of the saints. Here you can always recognize Peter. When he was told he would be crucified like Jesus, he said, I'm not worthy, because he denied Christ, and he asked to be at least turned upside down. So that's how you recognize the crucifixion of Peter. Those are those portraits. It still is there, and the Pope in charge is lit. So you can see Francis lit, and then there are a few spaces left. There was a period when there were maybe just like 4 left. And you know how people like, oh, the end of the world, you know, 4 more popes, and then that's it. Then they added a few more. So now we are safe for at least 8 popes as far as the end of the world goes. And we also have Pope Emeritus, who is, God bless him, alive. Right next to Francis, there's Benedict the 16th. He lives in the Vatican. Then, talking about the Middle Ages, there's this gorgeous candelabrum, Easter candle, 13th century. These are Roman soldiers mocking Christ, and below is the funny little creatures, typical medieval so-called bestiary. And I really love this medieval touch to the Basilica. This is the 13th century ciborium above the tomb of Paul, the apostle, who died during the same persecutions as Peter. And then in the apse, also 13th century mosaics with Christ on the throne surrounded by the saints. But now look at Christ's right foot. I'm going to get closer. There's a tiny little pope there, Honorius III. What is he doing there in swaddling clothes? Well, that is symbolical, of course. That's how the Pope feels spiritually with respect to Jesus, like a baby in swaddling clothes. Now, sometimes there are little things that I like for some reason. And on this floor, this is right by the main altar, I just adore this piece. Fossils. They're 600 million years old. So, well, here and there, I'll show you some of the favorite pieces that I have in some of these churches. Now, in the St. Paul's Basilica, I told you how it was built in the 1800s. The donations from all over the world were encouraged, and they did happen. So there's a lot of malachite, beautiful altars of malachite, and also lapis lazuli donated by the Tsar of Russia. And also these alabaster columns and the windows donated by Muhammad Ali Pasha. He was the viceroy of Egypt. So internationally, there were a lot of contributions. The new basilica was inaugurated in 1854. Another enchanting cloister, also 13th century. And now we jump to almost unknown church. I could sort of challenge, like, who has heard of Saint Stephen in the Round? Well, Santo Stefano Rotondo. It's a very peculiar church. It was never a pagan temple, which was common for a lot of churches. And you go inside, and it's the first round church that was ever built. Again, 5th century, again, heavily restored, changed throughout the centuries. But it's a very peculiar church, apart from its shape and history behind it. The frescoes. Now, I have to warn those of you who don't like horror movies, this is horror. Boom, there we go. And there are 34 frescoes from the 1600s that represent the martyrdoms of the saints. And they really are quite gory. And you can see the letters A, B, C, D. They are explained below frequently with the quotes from the Bible and the names of the saints who were either beheaded and cut into pieces or put in the middle of the snakes, or like Peter, crucified upside down. So it's one of the very, very peculiar churches of Rome. 34 of these frescoes. I picked some, well, they're all equally gory. Now, let's go to another really old church, Santa Sabina, 5th century, or Sabina. This is the Aventine Hill that has gorgeous view of Rome, but that will be for another tour with the views. And inside, there are the columns from another ancient Roman temple of Juno here on the Aventine Hill. The church again goes back to the 5th century, very few Baroque frills. It remains very, very simple, very pure. And next to it, adjacent, there is the headquarters of the Dominican order. So it's a really important church. So a Dominican friar inside. They were doing some shooting when I was there. This is, I believe, June. And this is a very old photo because you see people inside gathering and no masks and stuff like that. But it shows this door, which is from the 5th century. And the wood is very elastic, and that's why it survives quite easily. Marble breaks, but wood survives. It is a cypress wood, and cypress emanates the smell of ethereal oils for a couple of hundred years after you cut it. But it envelops all the senses. To enter the church, you hear the music and you smell, and it was really a great way of introduction, of entering into the church. But I'm showing you this door because it contains, you see here in the middle, and this panel, there is the first known cross in the history of art. Because, you know, the crucifixion was for the worst criminals. So in the early Christianity, it's not really present as public relations. Like, for example, in the catacombs, you don't really see crosses. You don't see them at all. So this is the first known representation of the cross in art and religion. Now, another old church, we'll go to more Baroque churches later. So Cosma and Damian, they were two Arab medical doctors in Asia Minor. And the church was built right next, you see this really ancient wall to the left. It was a temple of peace, and there was a library there, and it contained a huge marble map of Rome, of all the neighborhoods. It was like going to an office and looking at where your home was in which neighborhood, and bits and pieces of that marble map of Rome are preserved, very, very few, but it helped a lot to reconstruct how Rome looked like in the past. Now, Basilica of Cosma and Damian has, when you go downstairs, so below the street level, we are right next to the ancient Roman Forum. So this is a little temple, former temple, to Romulus, the son of Emperor Maxentius. And if you looked at it from outside, this is what you would see. So this is the ancient Roman Forum. This round structure in the center is what we just saw. It's below the floor of the Basilica. And Cosma and Damian was built by uniting the two spaces, a part of the Temple of Peace and this little round temple, into a church. And this is a beautiful marriage of 6th century mosaics and 17th century ceiling art. There's a little bit of everything in so many of these churches. The mosaic was heavily restored, but it's 6th century mosaic. And it's a beautiful marriage between different styles. But I love this little guy on the top of the tomb and his fanny manicure. So you can find these little things. Everybody going to the churches of Rome can find something peculiar, different, fun, interesting, profound. Now we jump to the hill right above the Colosseum. This is the church called Basilica also. You see, somehow I picked up all the basilicas, you know, maybe one or two are not, but there's so many. It was a really difficult choice. Now, this is the Basilica of St. Peter in Chains. And you see, again, ancient Roman columns. All these early Christian churches, 5th century, have identical columns, 20, 30, no problem. Years later, in the medieval churches of 11, 12, 13th century, it was extremely difficult to find that many identical columns. So in many medieval churches, you find them all different because they couldn't recycle, they couldn't find them so many in one place anymore. So this is St. Peter in Chains, and the chains are under the main altar. You see here, you go down to the so-called confession, the crypt with the most important relic. And according to the legend, the tradition, the chains from the prison of Peter in Jerusalem were brought to Rome, and when the Pope put them together with the chains from Mamertine prison, they miraculously merged. And there they are. They are like the target of many, many pilgrims, the chains of Peter. Now, in the same church, there's the biggest attraction, Moses by Michelangelo. Moses, very serious. Well, it was a huge project for the Pope Julius II. He was known as a militant Pope. He's the one who started rebuilding the Basilica of St. Peter. He's the one who forced Michelangelo to paint the ceiling. He's the one who had Raphael paint the Raphael's rooms. Julius was the biggest megalomaniac in the history of the Catholic Church, but thank God for that. And he wanted Michelangelo to design this enormous mausoleum with Moses at the top and 47 statues or something like that. And eventually he ran out of money because he couldn't build both the basilica and the tomb. So there we go, the empty tomb. He wasn't even buried in this church. When he was a cardinal, he was incardinated. That was his titular church. And this monument has nothing to do with the project for the tomb of the Pope. But Moses is here with his horns. You know how the horns are actually there because of the mistake in translation. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, says Moses is coming down from the Mount of Sinai with the beams of light. But Hebrew does not have vowels. In the Old Testament, Hebrew did not have vowels. And the Keren or Karan was translated as Keren. I don't speak Hebrew, but I know that there was a mistake in translation. So Moses, and because of one vowel, ends up with the horns. But I believe who knows? But I believe Michelangelo's intention, he was very much against the persecutions of Jews. He did whatever he could with hidden little messages everywhere. When you look at those horns, they don't look like horns. They do look like beams of light because they're not anatomically positioned as horns, but more likely as beams of light. And this gorgeous Moses looks a lot like Charlton Heston, I always think when I see it. Now, in the Church of St. Peter in Chains, there are so many works of art. It's really worth a visit regardless of Moses. There's this lovely 7th century mosaic of Saint Sebastian, the oldest work of art preserved in the Basilica, a great mosaic. And cute little skeletons everywhere. They're reminding us that, well, we're mortal. Here's Jack the Reaper as he was before with the scythe, because the scythe, because he's cutting, the death is cutting everyone equally. So that is the symbol of the scythe, and of course the hourglass. Now the little Basilica of Santa Prasede, it's very close to St. Mary Major. And it has extraordinary mosaics from the 9th century. Another rarity. This is a gem for both pilgrims and lovers of art. And here is the Pope who built the church. His name was Pascal I. And we know he's alive and he's not a saint because his halo is blue and square, while the saints have a round one. Prasede, a lady right next to him, and her sister, Pudenziana, they were the daughters of the first convert of Saint Peter. So frequently, later on, the legends made a few personalities merge. So it's not that there are exact documents about that, but a lot is about tradition. But if you go to the Church of Santa Prasede, this is another one of my favorite little places. In this chapel, inside you see already the arch with Mary and Jesus and the saints is really inviting. Inside are these mosaics to die for. They're all from 9th century. And these angels, these 4 angels, they look so modern. They could be like 1920s. And this is a chapel dedicated to a saint, Saint Zeno. There are so many saints, like thousands, but dedicated to the Pope's mother, Theodora. And you can tell, you see there are the ladies for saints here, but then to the left, there is a lady, again, with the blue square halo. That's the Pope's mother. And let me see if it works. There was little problems with this little video. So just to take you there virtually. It's tiny and you have to have a euro coin for the light, but it's definitely worth it. Or at least I'm really fascinated by the medieval art. I'm of course lucky to not have lived in the Middle Ages, but I love the art. This mosaic is from the 13th century, sorry about that. The rest was 9th. So there we go. Another, I promise I'll be done with medieval churches soon. I hope you like them. Here is the Church of Santa Maria in Cosmedin. And it's so famous. You've seen it, but you don't know. Now, let me see. Who remembers this? Roman Holiday, Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. He brings her here and then he fakes that this horrible mask, the so-called mask, the mouth of truth, bit off his fingers because it can tell if you said a lie. So, so many people are there waiting in line every day to have their picture taken with their hand in the mouth of truth. But the church itself is also really extraordinary. You see how it was built later in the 12th century, so the columns are all different because they couldn't find them identical anymore. And 11th, 12th, 13th century, all the way into 14th century, and even the Sistine Chapel, which was built in the 15th century, has this floor made of the bits and pieces of ancient Roman marble. And they were the families that were in charge of that art, like Vasaletto or Cosmati. So frequently you'll find Cosmatesque. It basically may have come from the Greek for cosmesis, for embellishment, for elegance, but go figure, that was 700 years ago. And they're absolutely striking floors made of practically recycled ancient Roman marble. And now I'll tell you the truth and nothing but the truth. This little guy does not come from this church, but one of my really favorite medieval churches. But just to show you, how inventive, and sometimes they would hide these little messages here and there, or maybe just having a jolly good time inventing what to put on the floor. And now something different. Now this is a beautiful square with a fountain that's only about 100 years old, so we won't pay too much attention to it now. I'm just kidding, it's a beautiful fountain, but we're here for the Basilica of Saint Mary and the Angels and the Martyrs. Now, the ruins go back to the 3rd century. These were the thermal baths, ancient Roman thermal baths of Emperor Diocletian. And Michelangelo, who else, comes, and he was commissioned by the Pope to transform the old ruins into a church. And that's exactly what he did. But he was just a fixer-upper, you will see. He's not responsible for any art in the church. And even these doors, for example, they are from 2006. Igor Mitoraj, a Polish-born artist, made these doors. And this is a beautiful door with the resurrection of Christ, with the cross inside. He's like resurrecting through the cross. So somehow there's this beautiful combination of modern art. There's even this Angel of Light, which is 1920s. And this was a former Calidarium where they had a pool with hot water. And inside the church, inside the Basilica, it's really enormous, like 90 meters per 30. It's just huge. And 90 meters would be times 3, almost 300 feet, like transept. And on the floor, you can see this line. It's a meridian. There is a little hole in the wall, and in 1702, a meridian was lined on the floor. Through the hole, it counts. Calculates the solar noon, and now there's some very smart stuff about that, which I really don't understand, how the solar noon goes off every day, a few seconds. But you see this patch of light. It came through the hole up on the. It appears a little bit before. And then it moves as the Earth moves. And when it touches this line, it's noon on the Rome meridian. And here you see it's in Gemini. So this was in June. And basically your horoscope sign depends, or zodiac sign depends on the constellation in which the sun rose the morning when you were born. So this meridian, I really love to come here at that time when we have little private tours with the driver. So we come, hops, always there to watch the sun and see how it works and watch it move. If you do a time lapse, then you can stay there for like 10 minutes, but then you have like just a half a minute of the whole movement. And there is this panel that explains how it all works. This is like Pisces, for example. Cute, you can see little stars on that ribbon. They show how the constellation of Pisces looks like. Now, in the sacristy, you can still see not just the panels, which explain the history of the place, but also the original ancient Roman walls without any decorations. Then there is a painting that shows the Christian martyrs who, according to the tradition, were the slaves who died during the building of the baths. Now, the Church of Saint Cecilia, it's another combination of Middle Ages and modern in the sense of 1700s. And what I'm holding here is a long postcard with the frescoes by Cavallini that go back to the 13th century, which we cannot see here. But if you come to Rome, I'll take you, because there is a nunnery, the Benedictine nuns, right next to Saint Cecilia, and you have to ring the bell and you can go up, and then you see the frescoes that were plastered during the rebuilding of the church throughout the history, and then rediscovered about 100 years ago. They're absolutely striking Last Judgment by Cavallini, but it's not allowed to take pictures. So I'm just showing you. I bought a postcard. But the Basilica of Saint Cecilia, she's the patron saint of the musicians, composers, poets, is another combination of many periods. Here is the Ascension of Saint Cecilia. See, there is at the bottom of this huge illusionist fresco, there is an organ. Then there's a bit of Middle Ages. Again, 9th century, our old friend Pascal, that's in the apse, the mosaic. He's also the first person to the left with, again, the square. He was working his way up to heaven before he died. And the medieval, beautiful Gothic canopy. But we saw that already, similar ones. We didn't see anything like this yet. This is a beautiful statue by Stefano Maderno of Saint Cecilia. They say she was tortured by the Romans. On this statue, you can see like 3 cuts of the axe because they beheaded her. And they say when her body was found in 1599, something like that, that he swore that he saw it like that. And there are like witnesses who talk about, yes, her body was uncorrupt, and that's how she was found, with her neck cut with an axe. So he made this beautiful statue of Saint Cecilia. Now, in the neighborhood Trastevere, this is all Trastevere now, Cecilia and Saint Mary in Trastevere. This church looks similar as architecture, but inside it's different. I ran into a wedding when I took this picture. There is a little bit of everything. Just you look around you and you see this coffered ceiling, gilded, then the medieval mosaics and ancient Roman columns. Look at them, they're all different because they were brought to this place later in the Middle Ages. They come from the baths of Caracalla, 3rd century ancient Roman baths. And they're also different. You see how in height, they had to make up with some pedestals because they were not even of equal height. They brought what they could find. And on the ceiling all the way at the top, you see this beautiful Mary's Assumption by Domenichino. The mosaics, again, at the top, you see them from the 12th century and very flat, big figures. If you look at the style, you can sort of date the art. And below, in between the windows, is late 13th century, when there's already a little bit of the movement perspective, but not yet Renaissance with the mathematically calculated perspective. It's too early for that. See, that shows you the whole atmosphere. Here too, you need to have a coin. I always carry little €1 coins somewhere for these little light machines. It's really worth it. So Santa Maria in Trastevere. And another little thing that I love a lot, and nobody could ever explain to me, was this cardinal just a bit weird, or did he like to kind of play with his coat of arms? Well, I'm sorry. This is the coat of arms of the Cardinal Bussi, who died in the 1700s, and they had 2 more cardinals in the family. And this is their coat of arms. I just like it. It's in one of the side chapels. You see, of course, the cardinal's hat at the top, and then there is the skull, again, quite common. And at the bottom, the hourglass, the passing of time, but the 2 eyes are kind of spooky and sweet. And now let's go to Piazza del Popolo, northern part of Rome. You see, that's the first obelisk that the pilgrims would see coming from the north. And as they entered, immediately to the left, that this was the first church they would go to, Santa Maria del Popolo, People's Square. Now, there's a long story about its medieval beginnings, but inside now, this is a beautiful example of the Renaissance. It's no longer Middle Ages, and it was rebuilt. It's a church that has amazing layers of history. Here are some medieval tombs on the floor. Not all were preserved, just a few. Or the cute little Baroque tombs. You always have these little guys reminding us we are mortal. But look at the top to the right. I'm going to get closer. There's a cocoon, there's a butterfly, resurrection. So there's always hope. It's not just a gory little skeleton, but you will be a butterfly again. You will resurrect. In that church, there's the famous Kijiji Chapel that, again, some of you may have seen or heard of or read about. Just think of Dan Brown's Angels and Demons. This is where there was the Demon's Hole. The chapel was designed for the richest banker of all times, Mr. Kijiji. Later on, the Kijiji family had the Pope. Through the money, they arrived to papacy as well. But Raphael designed this chapel for the Kijiji family. And on the floor, there is the entrance to the crypt of the family Kijiji. And that is the Devil's Hole from Angels and Demons. Now, this is actually, again, the skeleton in foreshortening perspective by Bernini, holding on the coat of arms of the Kijiji family. And Bernini also later designed the statue of the prophet Habakkuk with the angel who's kind of telling him, go and feed Daniel in the den with the lions. So there we go, little lion licking Daniel's foot. And the direction of the angel's finger points towards the obelisk in the book, towards the obelisk of St. Peter's Square. And that's where another cardinal dies. You know, it's a fun book. They're not bad. Not bad. Now, in the Church of Santa Maria del Popolo, there are 2 extraordinary Caravaggios. And with Caroline, we were thinking about preparing something on Caravaggio, on Bernini, on Michelangelo. We talked about Caravaggio already at the Gallery Borghese. Look at the dirty feet of this guy who's putting poor Peter on the cross. Very realistic. Conversion of St. Paul. See, he's down on the floor, and the peasant's hair, receding hairline. And the first thing we see is this huge horse. The first version was much more violent, and it was refused. But I could show it to you if we do the Caravaggio presentation. Then in that church, there's another little thing that I love a lot. And usually there are things for which I couldn't find any explanations. I would ask a parish priest or so, and so it's there. It's very old, usually. They say, okay, thank you. And this little guy, or actually is it 3 of them, or is it him? Just one, but in 3 different times of his life. You see on the right, he's a very young face, no mustache or anything. And then to the left, just a mustache, like the man in his prime. And then frontally, maybe, you know, a beard and the mustache, the old age. Maybe. Just inventing something. Why not? And then we go to more Caravaggio. This is not far away in the Church of St. Augustine, which is the mother church of the Augustinian order. Again, the dirty feet right into our nose, and the Blessed Mother for whom Caravaggio had a model, Lena, his girlfriend, who was a lady of the night. And this church was popular among prostitutes in Rome. And this is where they would offer them help, social assistance as well. And famously, this is where Fiammetta, the mistress of Cesare Borgia, the son of the Pope Borgia, was buried. But the tomb is no longer there. There's no trace of it. So that's another Caravaggio with the pilgrims and Mary and baby Jesus. And in the Church of St. Louis of France, just around the corner practically, there's Caravaggio's cycle of the life of Matthew. You see the old Matthew, again, rugged feet, very realistic, and ugly little angel, showing him, what to write and how to write. You see this gesture with fingers indicates teaching. And then to the right, if you look, that's the death of Saint Matthew with this angry Roman soldier. And there's somebody's, well, not very pleasant butt right into our nose in the corner on the right. So, well, I guess that's interesting enough. Caravaggio changed the history of art. But now, boom, now there's going to be a firework of art. This is the mother church of all the Jesuits, Gesù, or Jesus. And of course, the ceilings, these illusionist, extraordinary ceilings. This one is about the triumph of the name of Jesus with the addition of stucco. Now we are in the 1600s, where the Baroque is at the top. And this altar is something I really wanted to show you. This is where St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the order, is buried. And the lapis lazuli and angels and gold and all that, fine enough. But the panel with the St. Ignatius receiving the insignia, IHS for Jesuits, the name of Jesus, is on the panel that if you're passing by at 5:30 in the afternoon, the lights will be switched on and the panel's going to slide down. There's going to be beautiful Baroque music. And as you patiently wait, the statue of St. Ignatius will emerge from the altar every day at 5:30 in the afternoon at the Church of Gesù in Rome. It's an extraordinary church, and it's, of course, the most important thing is that the heresy has been defeated in the process. And the beautiful church was also a set of a royal wedding. I know we all like these royal things. You may recall on the 2nd of April, we'll be talking about the Torlonia family. And one of the Torlonias in the 1800s, Alessandro, the one who drained the lake and all that, he donated the money for the marble revetments of the whole church, of all the walls. And 100 years later, in 1935, another Alessandro Torlonia married Infanta of Spain. Infanta is the title of a princess who's not the first daughter, so will never be a queen, but it's the daughter of either Spanish or a Portuguese king. It's a title. So it was a royal wedding here at Gesù. Now, since we are in Baroque mood, I wanted to show you also the church of Santa Maria della Vittoria. You see, again, same illusionist ceiling, stucco figures. But this church is most famous for Bernini's Saint Therese in Ecstasy, the statue that shows the saint as she's having a vision of this angel piercing her heart. She's the founder of the Scalced Carmelites, like mendicant order, and like a branch of the Carmelites. And she's having these mystical experiences that are beautifully represented. Ecstasy, conversion, martyrdom, that was really popular in art in the 1600s, the Counter-Reformation. And this statue was met with a lot of criticism as well, because, well, it seems that, that he was a bit naughty here. And look at this angel who's kind of undressing Saint Therese in ecstasy. So there's been a lot of polemics, but it's one of the absolute masterpieces by Bernini, and one doesn't need to go to the Gallery Borghese. Well, of course, it's a beautiful thing to do, but there are also amazing works of art around in Rome, especially in the churches. And now the only Rococo square in Rome, Rococo, these like Baroque on steroids, exaggerated shapes. And here we go to St. Ignatius Church that was built Also in the 1600s, absolutely striking illusionist ceiling. Here we see St. Ignatius ascending. And if you have a neck ache, then you can look at the mirror and observe the ceiling. Looking for the continents, for example, you see here, look at them in the middle. Here it's Asia. There will be 4 continents conquered with the symbols of that continent. The guys falling down, like here's Africa, there's a black lady and the crocodile, and those bad guys falling down are always defeated heresies. Here is America with an Indian lady. Then here's Europe, Europa. Just absolutely stunning, stunning ceiling. Sorry, with also a fake dome, because guess what? They ran out of money. So building a real dome was really expensive. So but the dome looks real as you enter. But there are little points where you stand if you want to observe this or that. Different perspectives of the ceiling. It's really one of the most striking ceilings and generally works of art that we have in Rome, St. Ignatius. And they also have their fair share of relics, the bones of the saints, some little skulls and bones. And the churches that have these relics, people come to pray, that their prayers are fulfilled, and they give these little hearts, which are the proof that the saints are actually doing their job, interceding. And the popes can continue lying in their tombs surrounded by the virtues. This is Gregory XV, whose nephew, the Cardinal Ludovisi, built the church. Now, we were missing some Gothic, right? But this is Neo-Gothic. It starts in England in the 1700s, and I know it's like an hour and then 10, and we have like maybe 5 more minutes. And this is a church that is only 100 years old. It's known as the Little Milan Cathedral, and it's dedicated to the Holy Heart of Jesus. Inside, finally Gothic. We don't have much Gothic in Rome, very few elements actually, only one church, which I'm going to show you briefly. So this is 1920s, finally some stained glass, lancet windows, but it's 1917. And the only actual Gothic church in Rome is Santa Maria sopra Minerva. This is a very old photo I took, and it's been a couple of years that, not just with the COVID, of course, but the church has been under restoration. So I hope soon I'll be able to go back. It's an extraordinary church, but the only one in Rome that really has this what we consider like medieval feel to it, like dark and then stained glass and a blue ceiling with golden stars. But in front of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, above Minerva, there's this lovely little elephant designed by Bernini to carry the little Egyptian obelisk that was found in the neighborhood. And right behind it, there's the extraordinary dome of the Pantheon, which is a church. So that's why we're going there. This is a tour about the churches. So the Pantheon was an ancient Roman temple. And one of the most accredited theories, Pan is all, Theo is God. So Pan, Theon, all the gods, maybe yes, maybe no. There are many stories about it, but it's absolutely striking. Imagine just running into this as you walk around Rome, not knowing it's there. As you enter, there's this extraordinary dome with an opening, the oculus, and it is made of one piece of concrete that was poured into a mold. As the earth goes around the sun, of course, the light goes around the sun. At 12 o'clock, it's always at noon, it's always in the line of the door. And it's extraordinary church, which is functioning. And on Pentecost, the firefighters climb the dome and they pour that, because the Pentecost is celebrating the descent of the Holy Spirit on the apostles. So the firefighters go up on top of the dome and they pour like bags of rose petals on people. You can find it on YouTube. It's absolutely striking. But of course, the line to attend that is like all around. You have to go very, very early. And of course, the most frequent question is like, what if it rains? Well, there are the drains. The Romans were smart that way. The floor is slightly inclined and the rainwater is carried towards the drains. And this is where the two kings of Italy are buried. Victor Emmanuel, the first king of United Italy, and then his son Umberto, Re d'Italia, and his wife Margherita, the queen, who gave name to Pizza Margherita, by the way. And also Raphael, the extraordinary artist of Renaissance. He died, he was only 37 years old. And before we go for an ice cream, which just asked me where to go, I just wanted to mention that it's not done and over with the Baroque and yes, Baroque and Gothic, you know, it's kind of done, but there's so much. For example, Richard Mayer, the American architect, won the contest and had designed this Jubilee Church that was inaugurated in 2003. There are like 3 bales of concrete cement that was invented, copyrighted just for him. It refuses the pollution, it remains white. It's far away in the suburbs, but there's always something going on. I have sometimes people who ask for modern architecture. There's so much of that too. So when in Rome, there's something for everyone.
Wow. I'm gonna let people unmute themselves, and if you would be so kind as to give Olga some applause, I would appreciate it.
That was wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Olga.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Great.
All right. Well, my goodness. And I want to thank you, Olga, too, for just, there's some questions, and I know we have a little time. Thank you all for being okay with the whole mishap that I had with time zones. What do they say? When in Rome, don't think like an American, I guess. There's a couple of questions here from Madeline. What percentage of the population in Rome practice their religion and actually attend mass or services?
That the answer could vary from north to south. Let's say that Italians are mainly Catholic because they are a Catholic country. They do have a certain percentage, maybe 3%, 2-3% of the Protestant. It's the Chiesa Valdese school, that's how it's called. And a lot of people, their answer would be, I was raised Catholic, but then practically we have a joke every time something happens to Jesus, we're all there. So the family gathers for Christmas and Easter. Practicing, maybe 30% is the number I heard once. So I would say these are practically Christmas, Easter practices. Farther south you go, there's more tradition. The community is more oriented towards the Catholic Church. The Pope, the last church I showed you, Richard Mayer's, is a part of the Pope John Paul II project of bringing the church and activities of the parishes back in the suburbs. It's not just the church, it's a community center. I have friends who are not necessarily very religious even, but they say that they send their children to the parish because they feel safe and protected, and there is a lot of activities organized, from sports to anything else. So it's difficult to say. It is a Catholic country. Actual practicing is probably down to 30%, but the church is also doing, a lot of Caritas Kitchen also for a lot of people who are on the verge of poverty now with this economical situations. And I have friends who volunteer a lot. So it's
really mixed. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, there were some churches, and I think this is very much, I've noticed this in Europe, where, and I think it was in the Basilica of St. Peter in Chains that this person was referring to, they didn't see benches where people would sit. So some of the churches don't have, where they have chairs that seem to be moved. They
bring them for the Mass. If it's, for example, you saw St. Peter in Chains, we were there probably, Caroline, to see Moses, but there are not that many people who come to St. Peter in Chains. It's a small church, it's a relatively small parish. So I run into mass frequently there, but it's all just a few people, maybe Sundays, maybe 20, 30. You saw St. Paul outside the walls. It's absolutely huge. It's humongous, but there are no chairs. Well, they bring them. First of all, for regular mass on Sunday, there are the chairs in front of the main altar where they're under the mosaics, the apse. But if there is any more important holiday, they bring the chairs through the church. So of course, for holidays, like for example, when the Pope is doing the mass at St. Peter's, you can't find the tickets months ahead.
Right.
Well, thank you for that. Now, here's an impossible question, Olga, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If visiting Rome, what are the 3 top must-see churches you recommend?
Let's say that regardless of who you are, let's say background, are you Catholic, not religious, I'd say St. Peter's, because it's St. Peter's, because it's absolutely striking. And the Pantheon, these 2, absolutely a must. And then I would go to St. Ignatius, because I once did, I worked on a cruise with some colleagues, a couple of times, just happened. And we went through all the Mediterranean countries, and we went through England, and not just Mediterranean, so outside. Eventually we had 3 days in Rome, and I took people to St. Ignatius. And you know how many of people said, after having seen all these things, this is the most amazing thing we've ever seen.
Are you having tourists now?
No, not at all. Currently we are under very severe lockdown. And but apart from that, this summer, some of my colleagues have worked with the tourists from Europe, but those of us who are connected only with the American market, we haven't had any work since. I work for Tauk, if you heard about or Talk, and I signed contract the other day for 2022. So I have a job, but there are no groups. So people working either with Italians, and some of my colleagues have built. We are very closely knit little community, a few hundred of us, as much as you can tell for profession. In a sense, like how much do we know each other? We do have a bunch of chats and stuff, and we've been organizing tours for colleagues. And some of my friends who are archaeologists, art historians, they specialized in certain tours. And even among us colleagues, they've made a little something, to go on. But no, generally speaking, no, there's nothing. Apart from these little exceptions.
Right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions or comments?
It was wonderful.
It was so wonderful. You're
Beautiful
so
churches.
thoughtful to share it all with us.
I'd love to have more chances, we'll see with Carolyn.
So much.
You are welcome anytime. Yes, please ask.
Yes, Olga, I vaguely recall that when I was in Rome many, many years ago, in the Vatican Basilica, that there is a spot where Charlemagne was crowned. Am I dreaming, or is it true? A spot where is that? Is that the big circle as soon as you enter?
Yes. You may recall maybe when I showed the first slide of the
yes
in the central lane. I can't recall if that was the one or the one on the photo. I can't remember if I took it from here, the few meters left or right. But yes, there is a huge circle of porphyry, the volcanic rock that was still quarried in Egypt. You can still buy your kitchen tiles from Egypt. And that is where they say Charlemagne was crowned in the year 800. That's the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, which then Voltaire said was neither holy nor Roman nor empire. But
is that big huge circle, the brown one? Okay, good. So I wasn't dreaming. Okay, thank you.
Olga, I have a question.
Yeah.
Are there any activities that take place as such as schools or things like that in any of the churches? And who supports the churches?
The churches are supported, through the Vatican. There is, for example, when we pay taxes, and like I'm not Catholic, but it doesn't matter. I've never changed that. You can change it if you want. There is a certain percentage, it's called 8 per thousand, that goes to the Catholic Church. Unless you change it and say, okay, I don't want this to go to the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So there's apart from the taxes. And Catholic Church is also #1 owner of the real estate in the world. So there's a lot of institutions, real estate that the church is renting. And that money is used to finance the Caritas, for example, the charitable organization that really gives food to whoever stands in line. And they don't check, are you Catholic? Are you not? Are you hungry? There you go, there's food.
Mm-hmm.
So the churches, however, are having problems. And the Vatican itself, now we can go into how much money they have in the real estate, how much they don't. But their huge income comes from the Vatican museums, like millions, I believe 7 million people a year. And they have been closed for a year.
Oh my goodness, yeah, God.
They open for months and they're closed. They're closed again. So, and the donations, which now are reduced to the bone because people are jobless. There are more and more people who need help. So some of the churches that you saw are actually under the protection of the Ministry of Cultural Heritage. 17 churches in Rome, because they are national monuments. But for the rest, the church doesn't get help outside of itself and that percentage that goes from our income, unless.
Mm-hmm. Do they have any activities in churches there, such as schools or?
They do have catechism. I know that the parishes, especially in the suburbs, they organize activities for school kids. And the kids can go to catechism, which I believe is optional. And I would have to ask my friends. If you have any questions that, for example, here, I don't have 100% answer, but I really would appreciate you'll find on my site or so my email, write to me, and I'll be happy, for example, to not just check the information in Italian, but also ask friends who have kids who are Italian, and they can also tell me, okay, what exactly is it that in their experience the church has organized for their kids.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been very nice.
Thank you.
And that's olgarome.com, OLGAROME.com, Olga Rome. Also, someone asked if your Galleria Borghese is available to be viewed, and it is. It's on our YouTube website. So I put the link in the chat, but you're more than welcome to contact me if you're not sure how to get to the YouTube website, Carolyn at thecenterseville.org, or just call us and say, hey, I want to see Olga's videos. Put me in touch with Carolyn and I'll send you an email. So no problem there. Olga, I can't thank you enough. And wow, doing that sort of on the fly, I'm super impressed now. Any other quick questions or comments before we go?
So much.
A lot of thank you. Totally amazing.
Yes.
I mean, it was such eye candy, you know, just the saints with the, just, oh my goodness.
Future saints.
Yeah, future saints. I mean, by coming to this, whenever we can travel again, it'll make it so much richer, you know? So thank you.
Oh, that's what I wanted, the participants.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you again.
Don't
Take
hesitate.
care, Olga. Take good care.
Thank you.